Hey everybody, Who's Your Jedi here with another review for you. This time I'm talking episode 3 of season 2 of The Legend of Korra called Civil Wars Part 1. Overall, again, another pretty solid episode, but so much of this episode is set up. And one thing though that I do like is that we are kind of continuing on with that sibling theme that was going on last time around. Now here we're kind of really focusing more in on Tenzin as his siblings, and the continued conflict between Korra's dad and Unalaq. Now one of the things we've really been looking for this scene is getting to see more of Bumi and Kaya, and here we get to definitely see them interacting much more with Tenzin and really sort of getting some real insight into what it was like to grow up as Aang and Katara's kids. And of course, and the main thing that they're dealing with here is, just some old-time resentments here. With the main one being that it looks like, at least in Kaya and Bumi's eyes, that Aang played favorites and that Tenzin was his favorite. And frankly, this really isn't particularly surprising because, well, let's face it, Tenzin was the airbender. He was able to connect with Aang in a way that his other kids couldn't, in a way that no one else in the world could. And, well, to put it bluntly, frankly, I've never believed it when parents who say to their multiple kids, we love you equally. Now, just to be completely clear here, I'm an only child, right? But when I have observed about folks who have multiple siblings, no, it's true that, mom or dad is always going to have a favorite no matter what they say. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean they treat their other kids bad or that they don't love them a lot, but there's always a favorite. Okay, just again, my opinion. But it certainly was very interesting to hear that. And it's also just sort of interesting to see that, Tenzin is not above, sort of looking at his childhood through rose-colored glasses. I mean, he doesn't even remember that his brother and sister weren't on these trips that he took with his dad. So, Tenzin is not a perfectly reliable source on these things, and of course this gives some justification to Kaya and Bumi's resentment towards their dad, and frankly to Tenzin himself. Of course, Tenzin is not without good reasons to have some resentment towards them. I mean, obviously Bumi is kind of annoying and irresponsible, and always bragging and exaggerating. And it looks like Kaya in her younger days was sort of a little on the flighty side. Now, what's interesting here is that these personality traits are in some ways kind of reflective of Tenzin's own children. Ikki being the motor mouth. You can sort of see her as being somewhat a bit of a free spirit. Jinora, of course, very serious, kind of like Tenzin. And, well, getting a look at his uncle, it's really hard not to see Milo and Bumi as being, well, maybe not exactly the same, but these are two guys who are maybe, I don't know if I'd say exactly cut from the same cloth, but they're certainly the most eccentric of the siblings. So, some very nice thinking there. And I really like the fact that ultimately Tenzin is completely blind to all of this. Of course, he's also got the situation that now Tenzin has a fourth child, but, Rohan's just a baby, so he has no real personality at this point. And he's also got Korra, who, whatever people might say, he does genuinely treat like an adoptive daughter, with all the expected conflicts that come with that. Of course, Korra is, having some serious problems with her parents, and, oh, hey, Korra, only child. But no, what we're dealing here with is the continued conflict between her dad and her uncle. And I really like how, at times, like the push and pull of what is going on with family in this episode. Obviously, we have to see Mako and Bolin kind of having a moment where Bolin goes to his older brother for advice, and Mako is really cool about it because, well, let's face it, Mako is in a pretty good position to talk about how if you don't properly break up with a girl, this is going to lead to things that are not good. And of course, we also see that despite their conflicts with each other, Korra's dad and his brother, and Unalaq, that Korra's dad basically even flat out says, like, yeah, my brother and I are really not at odds with each other right now, but I'd never hurt him. He's my brother. Of course, then this is immediately turned on its head with Unalaq busting in there to arrest Korra's her dad and her mom for trying to kill him. Now, again, what I really like about what they're doing with Unalaq is that he's always being presented as a reasonable person. He's got a right to be pissed that these waterbenders tried to kidnap him, and he even says that Korra saved his life. So he flat out believes that these guys were going to kill him. Although, even though he was basically expecting to be that people there were going to kill him, apparently he still only felt the need to keep 2 guards around him, and apparently not even in the same room as where he was. Unalaq doesn't seem to have planning as his strongest suit, I'm thinking. So what's really interesting, I mean, this really is what here. You are constantly having all these people who genuinely care about each other and love each other, in conflict with each other, which is, of course, about a pretty good, as a good definition of family as you could ever ask for. Is people who love each other but are constantly in conflict with each other. And, yeah. But what I do like is that just like in real life, there is always conflict, happening, pushing people apart. But like we see with Korra and her mom and dad at the end of this episode, there's also resolution of family members coming back together, or of continuing to have a strong bond, like what we see with Mako and Bolin. Mako is there to provide that guidance that an older brother should be there to provide to his younger brother. And while they might be bickering, Tenzin's siblings are the first ones to step up there and go and help him when his daughter might possibly be in trouble. And again, we see with Korra's family that her father says, my brother and I might be in conflict, but I would never hurt him. So you can see that underneath it all, despite these conflicts, there is still this caring there, even among the people who are really the most at each other's throats at the moment. Now, let's kind of get on with talking about some of the other things. Now, I really find it interesting that Unalaq is saying that he's doing this to unify the tribes, because, well, the water tribes have actually been doing pretty well apart for each other apart. Now, granted, when we picked up with Aang, the Southern Water Tribe had really deteriorated to the point where it was basically just one village full of some old people, some kids, and 2 teenagers. But now the Water Tribe has really bounced back, and what Unalaq is not addressing really is that apart from the spiritual aspect of things, the spiritual aspect of things is the only real difference between the tribes that he is addressing. He's not really taken into account why the Southern Water Tribe might not view this as a good thing. He is not taking into account the cultural divide that has evolved between these 2 tribes. Now, granted, we've seen quite a bit of intermarriage between Northern and Southern Water Tribe people, but still, he's really not fully thought all of this out. But his expressing what he's doing as a desire for unity. This is the sort of thing that is going to perfectly get through Korra's defenses. Because everything that happened in Republic City last season was due to a lack of unity. So by holding that up as his banner, he's really kind of, in a way, pushing Korra back. He's using this as a reason. He even says, you need to stay out of this. That by picking a side, that Korra would really do more harm than good. And in a way, everything he's saying is perfectly reasonable. I really love that Unalaq is not a straight-up villain. He is constantly being presented as a reasonable man who is just possibly making bad decisions, or at least not thinking his decisions out fully. And, he is right. If Korra does pick a side, there's every reason to think that this could just simply make things worse. And remember, the job of the Avatar is balance. It is not really about justice. It is about balance. Now, kind of moving on. Now, we definitely did see quite a few nods. Places like Ember Island, Kyoshi Island, Ba Sing Se are all name checked. That's really cool. And let me see here. I'm just looking at my notes here, making sure I talk about everything. And I do like how on the one hand you also have, Korra's uncle Unalaq saying, "I have no doubt that you're going to be the best Avatar ever." And what's really interesting about him is, like I said, he's constantly being presented as a reasonable man who is just making questionable decisions, but also, after what we've seen last season, you can't. I think that you just can't help be a little bit suspicious. Like, is all of this a con? Is he really doing all of this just to manipulate Korra? But I just don't think that's what's going on, because then he's just a cartoon. He's just a straight up villain. He's just very, very good at manipulating and putting on a front. But if he is really just just a good person who is, again, making questionable choices, then it's infinitely more interesting. There's actually a quote I came across by a fellow by the name of J. Michael Straczynski. Now, he's written Spider-Man comics. He wrote that was it Angelina Jolie movie, The Changeling. But he's actually best known for creating the 90s sci-fi series Babylon 5. And what he basically said, and I'm paraphrasing here, is that the most interesting stories really aren't about a conflict between a great good and a great evil. A straight up example would, of course, be what we saw last season. He says basically the best stories are actually the conflicts between two great goods. And that's what we're seeing here with the conflict between Korra's dad and her uncle. Her father is, of course, his big thing right at the moment is that the Southern Water Tribe needs to have their independence respected. But Unalaq's point is, well, the Southern Water Tribes being independent and they're having their own way of things has caused the world to be out of balance. They have created a problem for the entire world. And this needs to be addressed, or we are all in really serious trouble. So, from what it looks like, these are both good people who are doing what they are doing for the best of reasons, with the best of intentions, for good, for good. And yet they are in conflict. And, Straczynski's right. This is genuinely, to me, much more interesting than just a straight up hero versus villain fight. Now, this episode is really kind of a little bit hard to judge on its own merits, simply because it's so much of a setup, and of course so much is going to be tied into what happens next episode. But, trying to take this episode on its own merits is what we do around here. It's what we do with pretty much each and every episode. And while it doesn't stand entirely as a standalone episode, because really no two-part story of a show can, I'd have to say it does stand pretty well on its own. And it certainly sets up a lot of interesting things that are probably going to come to a head in a really interesting way next time. I'm really just only disappointed that we haven't really seen what Asami is getting up to. But, you can't have everything. Anyway, guys, that's all I got for you this time around. As always, please comment, rate, and subscribe. And until next time, take care and have a good one.